dangerously close to Daniel Jones from the Giants. Daniel, is that you? Beat the Chiefs. Show me. If the Broncos and Russell Wilson can show me that they can beat the Chiefs, then I will start believing.
And the crowd up. And so are this defense, and Kansas City won't snap the ball again. The Denver Broncos have
On the Lions, former Bear, gonna make this his revenge game for sure. David Montgomery gets the touchdown that ices the game. No! And there's a flag. There's flags. There's flags. There's flags. There's flags. Snap. Hold. Kick.
Denver wins! Denver wins! Let's go!
They open. No!
What happened? Oh shit. What is going on, guys? Happy Sunday. We are coming to you live on Sunday night because we have a special edition of Only Football. You might remember last year that we did this thing, Interview 32, where we would pull one fan of every team in the NFL and interview them. And we didn't get all 32 teams last year. We're going to try it again this year. So we put some feelers out. Hey, if anyone's interested, would they like to come on? And we got somebody, okay? Now, not only did we get somebody, but we got somebody from Australia. I could not have imagined that our first interview of the 2024 season would take place in halfway across the world, depending on where you live. So here we go, bringing in Ravens fan Harrison. Did I say that right?
Yep, that's it. Harrison,
man, first off, I'm just super stoked that you could do this. You're a Ravens fan, and everybody that watches this show knows that I have personal animosity with the Ravens because of Joe Flacco's mile high magic. It feels sacrilegious to even call it that. But man, I'll never forget where I was when I saw that play happen. And to this day, that was the only postseason that I didn't continue to watch because I was so hurt by that play. And the Ravens, of course, went on to win the Super Bowl. And I look at that like, oh, that means that, you know, we were supposed to beat the team that ended up winning the Super Bowl. You know how you get into those loops. Yep. And then the NFL script writers are so great. They said, well, let's make week one the opening game of the 2013 season, Ravens Broncos, and Manning threw 7 touchdown passes. And that kind of leveled the scale a little bit. But first off, right off the bat, like, do you remember that play? I'm not sure how long you've been watching Ravens games, so just let us know kind of a little bit about you, how long you've been a fan, and if you remember that.
Yeah, I do remember that play. I wasn't able to watch it live. So in Australia, we have not really had a lot of access to like NFL Game Pass wasn't even a thing in Australia around that time. So I've been a fan since about 2010, watching highlights on YouTube. We used to have one game a week get streamed on TV here. And that was often, very popular teams. So I think I first saw a Ravens game when I was watching the Patriots play the Ravens in just a regular season matchup. And then they matched up again in the 2010 AFC Championship. And I saw them lose in the famous Billy Cundiff missed field goal to send the Patriots through to the Super Bowl. And I just liked the spirit of the Ravens team. I kind of liked the defensive attitude. Australians love an underdog. So somewhat of an underdog city, an underdog team. That's how it kind of started with a Ravens fandom. And so watching that game on like the highlights of that, what we call the Miles City Miracle and that postseason, I did get to watch that Super Bowl because the Super Bowls, of course, always played live. It's like an event here in Australia. It's on a Monday morning at 10 a.m. and everyone gets drinks. Wow. So that was, it's like everyone gets a day off work to watch the Super Bowl. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, an overview of the start of Ravens fandom back in the early 2010s, which was pretty good time for the Ravens. I'm not going to lie. Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, you had Joe Flacco. I mean, just to ask, more like broad question. I've never talked to anybody from Australia until right now. First off, love the accent. I mean, I don't know if you guys consider it an accent because it's common where you're at, but do I sound like I have an accent?
I mean, I consume a lot of American media and sports, so I don't feel there's an accent. Australians, it definitely is harsher when there's a bunch of Americans and Australian pops in, especially in a TV show. Like, it's kind of sounds that's a bit odd. But yeah, I think the exposure to I watch a lot of baseball as well. Orioles fan, kind of coming off the Ravens fandom as well. So there's a bit of that, and I just listen to so much like American sports podcasts. So I don't really feel like you have a jarring accent. It all just starts to sound,
Blend
pretty
together.
similar after a while. Yeah.
Well, I became a Broncos fan when I was in elementary school. We went to the public school library and we laid out every book. And I picked the Broncos because I liked their uniforms.
Mm.
And for some reason, it just stuck. I'm 20 plus years now of never seeing a game. And it was funny because the friend that opened the book with me, I called him about 7 years ago. And I was like, "Are you still a Broncos fan?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "No, like, you wouldn't miss a game. Like, you're a fanatic." And he was like, "Yeah." And I said, "I don't know
Mm.
what," when we opened that book, but some for you, I mean, being in Australia and picking the Ravens, I know you said it was the underground kind of a tough city, the underdogs. Was there a draw from their uniforms as well? Because I consider the Ravens one of the coolest uniforms in the NFL.
I do like unique colors in terms of, yeah, like every team kind of has blue, red, something like that, and the Ravens purple is, purple is the color of royalty, and that's kind of a bit of a draw, and yeah, like the whole color scheme in terms of like the black and the purple, it just pairs so well, and it, like you see in their game days and their highlight videos, it's such a unique kind of, they really go into that underdog black kind of vibe of their uniforms. It's really cool, especially when they do like the all blackout games. Like, that's just awesome.
Yeah, those are absolutely sick. And have you ever had the opportunity to go to what is it? T and
M&T,
M and
M&T
T?
Bank, the bank. No, no, I haven't. I've never been to America, unfortunately. I will at some point. Yeah, it's definitely a goal, but no, I've never been to an NFL game.
That's cool. Do you think the NFL might, because they're expanding internationally?
Mhm. Yeah.
Do you think Australia is probably the next country to get a game?
I hope so. Even if we get a preseason game, or some sort of, we've had one college game here. I think it was Stanford at UCLA in like 2011. Played one college game here, but I hope that they will come here. I don't see it within the next 10 years. I think the fan base has to keep growing, and the stadium has to keep growing, because we don't really have a capacity stadium of the rectangular nature. Most of our stadiums in Australia are all circular, for our national sport called AFL. So to play an NFL game on a massive stadium that's circular would just be a little bit odd. So there's a few more stadiums that need to get, I think, built to be able to house an NFL spectacle of, that would actually be suitable for an NFL team.
Yeah, you would definitely understand the needs better. So, are you saying that the stadium is too big, that it wouldn't
Mm.
look right if only
Yeah.
25% of the stadium was filled up? Yeah.
Yes, I think so. I think so, and it just wouldn't look as, it's kind of like in Germany we see those international games where the stadiums are full, and those are what 60,000 seater stadiums, but Germany has a population of double, if not just a bit more than double in Australia, and it's huge. Australia really only has a 29 million person population, and you'd have to house it in Melbourne, which is like one of the southernmost Australian cities, and I reckon you could probably get maybe 25,000, and their biggest stadium hosts 100,000 people. So it would just look very small. It's also a circular stadium, as I said. So you'd have, a bunch of grass around the outside. So I think there's still a fair way to go in terms of hosting an NFL game in Australia, unfortunately. Yeah.
So, pivoting to the draft that just took place, how involved are you with the draft and the players they pick, or is it more of just like, I watch the games, but I don't really watch like press conferences and all the nerding out behind the lines of like the players that they're getting and the prospects, or do you look at the players coming in? And of course there were Odell Beckham Jr. just signed with the Dolphins, so he's not there right now, but do you keep up with kind of all the player movement that happens throughout the offseason?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely still an appetite in the off season in Australia. It's not just watching the press conferences in after games or pre games, and the draft is still pretty big. Obviously, there's a fair few NFL fans in Australia, and we always talk over social media or in person about things, and the draft is definitely a bit of a thing to watch. Ravens lately have been in luckily a position where we're not focusing too much on the draft in terms of like high draft picks. But we have found success in the draft in terms of like Rashad Bateman, Tyler Linderbaum, some of our good lately we've got some good draft picks from the draft, but they've been late first round, early second round, stuff like that. So, I mean, we've got some defensive players in this recent draft. Wiggins obviously being our number one draft pick in the late round. So I definitely follow and understand what's going on in the off season. We've just luckily been able to focus on free agency and been able to focus on, trying to solidify our team through that avenue instead of the draft.
Yeah. And I know for the Ravens that I was going to ask you, because I would love to hear more about how you feel about their overall drafting philosophy. A lot of people know that the Ravens are known for getting the best player available, and they stay true to the internal scouting on the inside. Sean Payton just talked about this the other day, how the outside media has all this noise about, hey, this guy's better than this guy, and it's hard not to let that come into the building. But I think sometimes teams also can overthink a prospect. You write down all their weaknesses, and you start nitpicking. But the Ravens seem to not overthink it. Whenever they're drafting and there's a player that's falling down the board that should have been drafted 20 picks ago, you can almost guarantee that the Ravens are going to make that pick. And they capitalize on those type of things all the time, whether it was, I think, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, moving back up into or maybe they moved down, but they made some movement because Kyle Hamilton was falling in on the draft boards. He was the best safety. And I just seems like every time I'm watching the draft, there's a player falling down the board, the Ravens are right there. And it's like, oh, the rich get richer. They just keep on getting all these talented players. And do you think that that approach, as far as like drafting players, do you think that makes it fun being a fan, because you tend to be more excited about those players that are falling down the board that were supposed to go really high up? Or what's your just thoughts on how they've kind of approached the draft the last couple of years?
I think since moving on the GM Ozzie Newsome, moving on to Eric DaCosta, being the GM of the team, it's always hard for a fan base to kind of trust a new GM after Ozzie Newsome was obviously so great at drafting and player management. But I think we've developed a level of trust where we can be like, all right, we're late in the first round. There's a player here that we're picking up. Some of us know who this player is, some of us don't, but we can trust that he's going to be the right player for us because we have that trust in the GM. The draft of Lamar Jackson is possibly the greatest example of picking value in the late first rounds where no one else picked him up, and he's turned into a 2-time MVP. Kyle Hamilton, possibly one of the best safeties that slid down the draft board. So I think the best player available will always find a way to get into a team. I think there hasn't been too many times where we have a huge need. I think the only time I can think about that is wide receiver. We possibly reached a little bit in some wide receiver drafts. I think this year last season we had a better offense than last year in terms of wide receiving production. So we didn't reach up, which I probably could have seen us do for one of the, Malik Neighbors or something like that. If we really wanted to go for a true number 2, number 1 receiver. The rise of Zay Flowers obviously has helped us out in that area.
Yeah,
He was
I knew he
great
was gonna be
value.
great.
Yeah, so I think we're towing a good line between picking the best player available and picking the best the player that we need in that spot.
Yeah, with Zay Flowers, I don't. Do you play fantasy football?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so he was my receiver that I was like, oh, draft Zay Flowers at the end of like, I think he's gonna really
Mhm.
be the as far as production goes, because there
Mm.
was Jackson, JSN from Seattle,
Yeah,
and I think Jordan Addison maybe came
yeah.
from the same class, and they were kind of doing, comparing them like they do every draft. And Zay Flowers, you just knew he was going to come in and flourish. So with Odell Beckham now being a Miami Dolphin, how do you feel about, because you guys have Rashad Bateman still, correct?
Yeah, he just signed an extension. So hopefully developing him a bit more into a true number two, another offensive weapon. Yeah.
So the thinking is that Zay Flowers is going to be wide receiver one. Do you consider him that right now?
I don't think I consider him that right now, but I think he has the potential to be that in that sort of Tyreek Hill kind of mold. I think when people think of a wide receiver one, they think of, Calvin Johnson type huge wide receiver that can go and get it one on one.
Right.
But this game is evolving so much in the short passing and the yards after receiving that Zay Flowers has the potential to be a number one if he continues to play in that, Todd Monken offensive style.
So you've been, like you said, a fan since 2010. So I would say that whole entire period, there's not, I mean, you had John Harbaugh all those years. I
Yeah.
can't think of really a year that stands out in my head as, somebody that's not a fan,
Mm.
that they didn't play well, or, they're a very competitive team. They
Mhm.
draft well, they're well coached. Um, some teams tend to only care about drafting the most talented player, and then other teams focus more on building a good locker room and bringing in guys that are, whether it's like selflessness or,
Mhm.
cheering for each other. Like, you don't really think of a lot of kind of toxic locker room stuff with the Ravens. They always seem
Yeah.
to be out of the news in that way. Whereas the
Mm.
Cowboys, it's, oh, they got this guy and this guy and he's arrested, and,
Yeah.
all these different things. You don't really hear that from the Ravens. How do you feel about is there a year that you said, oh man, it really sucked being a Ravens fan this year? Has that even happened to you yet? And how much
Mm.
of that do you accredit John Harbaugh for, just
I
having that team ready to go every year, no matter what?
It definitely comes from the top down. Definitely comes from Harbaugh throughout the assistant coaches, and then to the leadership of that we've had, the players that we've had. I think they just carry that culture when they come into the team. So I'd say there was a couple of years post Joe Flacco where we kind of had a few players starting. Ryan Mallett was our starter for a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Um, so, yeah, yeah. I mean, rest in peace. I think that's
Oh
we
yeah.
had a fair few things happen with the Ravens. The last year we've had a few players pass away, but yeah, we had those. The Ryan Mallett was our starter for a while. There's been a few times. I think it was 2017, 18, just before Lamar Jackson really was kind of where we were in a little bit of a no man's land. But then the lowest point we got was 8-8 or 9-8. Like that, you can't really complain about that. We're in such a tough division. At that time we're in such a tough conference. So I wouldn't say that there's been any times where there's been a bad time to be a Ravens fan. Some other fans might not agree with that. There's certainly high expectations amongst our fan base, but I'm very, privileged and lucky to be saying that I can't remember a hugely terrible time in the fan base's history.
Yeah, I used to feel the same way about the Broncos in the last 9 years have been rough. We haven't been to the playoffs in 9 years. So, all you can do is
Mhm.
just not take it for granted and appreciate it while you have it, because you never know,
Yeah.
how long it's going to last. But it seems as long as John Harbaugh is the coach, kind of
Yeah.
like Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, your
Yeah.
floor might be 8-8. That might be as low as you can get on a well-coached team.
Yeah.
And talking about the Steelers, there's not many rivalries in sports as good as the Ravens and Steelers. When you think about just tough rivalry, old school
Mm.
football, you definitely, you got, Packers Bears, and then I think in that same category, Ravens Steelers. And I'm really excited about Ravens Steelers this year, because I think it's going to be kind of like an old school game when you look at the way Pittsburgh drafted, getting a bunch of offensive linemen. Like, they're loading up to play power football again behind one of the best O lines that they've had since maybe 2012. I
Mhm.
think the Steelers, among most people, they're the hardest team that you face. Or would you agree with that? Actually, do you think that the Ravens Steelers is the Ravens' biggest rivalry, period? And then, how do you feel personally about that matchup?
I would say for sure it's the biggest rivalry. Over the time I've been a fan and following the league, both teams have been around the national conversation in terms of good teams and playoffs all the time. There's not really been a year, even like the last 2 years, where the Steelers were, bad. They were 8-8 again. Like they were making the playoffs. They're still over 500. Um, our fan bases tend to kind of mirror each other in a way, and sometimes your biggest rivalries are with people who you're the most similar with, in terms of, you guys are so similar, why aren't you better friends? And it's just because we're competing in the same division, we're competing for the same the hearts and minds of the cities. And I think that, yeah, the rivalry is definitely still real. There's obviously fresh faces every year, but that tradition kind of carries on, and both teams do a really good job in going in on that rivalry and making the most of it. There's a reason why we play each other on Sunday night football every year, because whether it's at our place or at theirs, and we're always vying for the same titles. And I think it's great. Iron sharpens iron. We always want to beat them, and it really hurts to lose to them. Even last year when we lost to them, despite winning we'd already won the division. That just still wanted to beat them at the last game, but those things happen, and I think that they're a great team. I have respect for them. I don't like how many Steelers fans there are in Australia, purely because of
Really?
their history. Their past success has built them a lot of credit in Australia, especially with older fans in the in their 40s and 50s. There's a lot of Steelers fans. So we have a good yarn about it. But yeah, it'll be another good year this year, especially Justin Fields and Russell Wilson coming along, a little bit of offensive power. Very excited for what this year has to come with that rivalry for sure.
Do you think the Steelers are going to be the most competitive this year than they've been for quite some time?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, as you said, the O line, like, everything starts in the trenches. So, I think that the battle is still going to rage on. Like, the Russell Wilson can, if he can be anything like what he was last year. I don't want to talk about Russell Wilson with you too much, being a Broncos fan.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure
still
you.
got
I'm
the
sure you.
jersey hanging on the wall.
I'm sure you wish him well. The fact, yeah, I can see that the whole situation with that is just wild. Who would have thought this even 5 years ago? This whole situation happening, but I think that it's going to be a race to the finish again. So I think that it's going to be an awesome matchup this year.
In your opinion, what do the Ravens need to do to take it to the next level? So
Mm.
Lamar Jackson is incredible. Actually, let me put that question on the back burner and ask you this. How did you feel about the Ravens paying Lamar Jackson? I know he just
Mm.
won MVP.
Yeah.
So of course, the timing of this question is
Yeah.
probably we like it, but
Yeah.
there were some people saying that Lamar Jackson, sorry about that. There's some people saying that Lamar Jackson, can't win the big game, or mostly it wasn't that, it was more injury concerns. And if he was going to, be available, and of course he didn't have his own agent and he wanted to represent himself, and all that kind of went on during the off season. What was your kind of take during the process of the negotiating period with the Ravens and Lamar? And where were you kind of at with that?
Yeah. I definitely was a bit troubled by how long it was taking. It felt like just a kind of a little infighting in the family type thing. It felt like it was going to happen at some point, as in the signing was going to happen. I didn't see him going to another team, but it was whether or not we survived that transaction with a still happy, an intact relationship, whether or not he felt like he got what he deserved, which I think he did in the end. Obviously, the market is going to go up. There's going to be another quarterback that gets the most amount of money. It's the most important position in sports. And I think that you have to pay someone who's previously been an MVP. He, yes, has had some injury worries, but we saw in the last season that he really changed his play style to, he still ran a lot, but he was running out of bounds a lot. He was going down before the tackle. So he's changed his play style. And I think there was a lot of fans who are very quick to turn on him. And I think that what's the saying is, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And I think that, not saying he is a bad player, but I think that he's better than, 90% of other quarterbacks in the league. And those other 10%, you're never going to get them. Like, we're never going to sign I don't think we're going to get another player, especially because of what Baltimore is in the terms of the city. I just think that it's just a perfect fit. And I think that it was done as well as it could be. And I think that everything kind of ended up working well. I definitely wanted to keep him. There was a few fans who didn't, but it's all worked out, I think.
Yeah, I would say so, especially after, like we said, MVP, and he's won a unanimous MVP. And I believe he's the only player to win the MVP unanimously. I think there was one other, maybe. But I remember it was like one of one or one of two. So something we just don't see. Normally, people come together and, okay, 90%, I mean, 100%. Like, you have to have a pretty outstanding season for everybody to agree. Because, humans will disagree on almost anything most of the time, even if you don't want them to. So I thought, wow, when he got signed, I was like, okay, well, now it's time for him to prove that he is worth every penny. And I think it's fair to say that in order for Lamar Jackson to be worth all of that money, he could win MVP every season for the next 5 years. But if it doesn't result in a Super Bowl ring, how do you feel about it? Because, I mean, and kind of moving towards that question, like, what do the Ravens need to do to get over this hump, whatever it, and that's the thing about the Ravens roster is, I said this after they lost to the Chiefs. I said, man, this is pretty demoralizing, because you go back to your locker room and, you put all the players up on the board and you look at this team and you go, where do we improve? And you can make small improvements here or there, but this was a pretty loaded team. And they didn't seem, I mean, credit Kansas City's defense in that game. They played out of this world. But as a Ravens fan, is there something that you can clearly see, like, they're not going to get over this mountain until they fix blank? Like, what is that thing?
I think not panicking in terms of when the game doesn't go the way they want it to go at the start, not changing what made them great throughout the regular season has probably been the biggest Achilles heel. In terms of abandoning the run is what Ravens fans have been crying for them to not do. Don't stop running the ball just because it doesn't work on the first couple drives. Let the offensive line work. Let the backs find the creases and get through. we signed possibly the best running back of the last 5 years, maybe not 10 years, but 5 years in Derrick
Oh, yeah.
Henry. We've got a couple of running backs coming back from injury. I think that, having Lamar as that dual threat quarterback, continuing with the run, being that threat, I would say that just not abandoning that scheme and trying too much in those moments, because we know playing Kansas City, they're going to hold on to the ball. Mahomes is going to find a way. We have to keep the ball out of their hands, and we do that with long, sustained drives with the run. And I think that a lot of the improvements, as you would say, were made internally with the players, just maturing another year, learning the system another year, going through a regular season and a postseason together for another year. I think that the internal improvements is probably more beneficial than an external improvement, like another coach coming in. Like people were saying, oh, we need a new coach. We need Harbaugh needs to be gone and bring in a fresh approach. And I think that that's just incredibly stupid, trying to reinvent the wheel. Just need to stick on that train when you've seen it work so much throughout the regular season.
Right. I agree. Like nobody was ever going to throw Peyton Manning out of Indianapolis, because he didn't, he wasn't playing well in the postseason, and he only got one Super Bowl ring that he got in 2008. But, there are many seasons of him falling short to Tom Brady. And some people say he was the greatest regular season quarterback ever. And they mean that. The postseason, when he wasn't playing in the dome and he wasn't inside of a controlled environment, and that's why home field advantage was so important for the Colts. But when Manning went outside, he turned into a different type of quarterback. Do you feel like Lamar Jackson is turning into a different quarterback, kind of similar to Manning's way, and shrinking in big moments?
That's a good question. Yeah, you can't lie about the stats in terms of games played in the postseason, and his numbers have not been as good as a regular season. I think, as obviously the postseason, the teams are better, but you look at his record against teams above 500 in the regular season, and it's really good. It's just that playoff environment that I think he's only going to benefit from being in more and more. But yeah, there's definitely, if there's not another improvement this year, there will be questions about what is he doing in that time that's not making him productive. So I think I can't say that it's all his fault as well. I think last year against the Chiefs, he was, he played well. It can't all be on one player. So I would say it has to be a team effort, but Lamar playing well is obviously integral to the success in the postseason.
I think with Derrick Henry being added, that people are really sleeping on this. And if you look at PFF, he was, I believe, ranked third of all running backs last season. And they say, well, Derrick Henry's taken a step down. Derrick Henry's regressing. And I say, okay, fair point. But what is he taking a step from? From having a 2,000-yard rushing season? So now what? He gets 1,800. Then he takes another step down. He's still 1,700. Okay, both things can be true. Derrick Henry can be slowly regressing as he gets more tread on the tires, or less tread on the tires, but he was on top of a mountain so high that he is still outperforming as far as efficiency goes. Like, he's still a top 5 running back in the league. And for some reason, just because of the year Tennessee had, and Derrick Henry didn't have his normal outstanding season, people have just kind of been like, oh, Derrick Henry, his best days are behind him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be so quick to just throw him in that group. But with that said, there are examples in recent history of running backs that just kind of fell off really fast. Remember David Johnson? He was like such a big deal for that one year. Do you remember like even Zeke? Zeke had these amazing years, and then all of a sudden, what happened to Dalvin Cook last year? So what? You know what I mean? So what? How do you feel about Derrick Henry? Is there a lot of optimism that he's going to be that thing that's going to get you to the Super Bowl? Because I would say it's not an understatement to say that the acquiring Derrick Henry is the thing that could get the Ravens in the Super Bowl next year.
Yeah, I think the ability to not be the focal point of an offense will probably be a big help for him. Having what we said before, the wide receiver help. We've got obviously Lamar Jackson, and having not having all the pressure on you is probably going to help as he obviously ages. Like you're speaking of, the first thing that comes to my mind is Todd Gurley and Le'Veon Bell. Those players but then I think of their style of play, and then I think of Derrick Henry's style of play, and they don't quite match up. And I think that Derrick Henry is still physical. He's still in a peak physical condition. So, and his speed, of course, is elite, but it's not his hallmark. I think he's still a physical runner and bigger than even some offensive linemen or the same size as them. So that guy running at safeties in the open field, whether his pace has died off a little bit is, it's a scary thought. And I think that it's definitely a recipe that could bring postseason success for sure.
And they did just, I believe, are you familiar with Devontae Walker and his battle to getting into the NFL? He's a wide receiver for the Ravens. He was a 4th-round wide receiver, and he made national news last year when he was initially denied eligibility to play. The NCAA ruled that Walker would have to sit out the 2023 season after transferring from Kent State to North Carolina. And then he was ruled a 2-time transfer, even though he never played a game at North Carolina Central in 2020 when its season was canceled due to COVID-19. So there was a bunch of attorneys on the case. And basically now Walker is reinstated, and he is going to be maybe a serious weapon for the Ravens, joining Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. And I think Nelson Aguilar is also, he's kind of like a Tyler Boyd type receiver. He ran a 4.36. So he's got the speed to take the top off the defense. He's 193 pounds. He's 6'1", so pretty good size. And he said, I feel like I can do a really good job of getting over any defense. Do you think the Ravens receiving core is a little underrated right now? And do you think Devontae Walker is going to have potentially a somewhat of a breakout season?
Thanks for bringing that to our attention, the Devontae Walker situation. I'll definitely have a read about that. I've always got interest in finding out about the NCAA and what they try and pull and what they do, and the way that some players try to fight against some of the NCAA stuff. But I think that, to answer your question, the Ravens receiving core, I wouldn't say it's underrated. On paper, it looks good. I think you just need to perhaps show it a bit more on the field. I think that Aguilar had some good moments last year. Rashad Bateman obviously got signed to another contract. Zay Flowers had a good year. But I think that there's still work to be done in terms of national recognition, just simply because of how good the wide receiver core around the league is currently. And I think there's still a few other teams that have a better room than the Ravens.
Yeah, and I'm trying to pull up their draft. Okay, see, they got Nate Wiggins, corner, and then they went with Rosengarten with their second pick in the second round. And offensive line was a big need for the Ravens. If you ranked it, it could have been the number 1 need. Ronnie Stanley dealt with injuries, and then he admitted after the season that he didn't play up to his own standards. The Ravens ended up kind of pondering these financial decisions, whether it'd be worth it to part ways with some of the players. And do you think the addition of Rosengarten, I think he's going to be a player that is going to start immediately for the Ravens. I know also last year we got Ben Powers, who is a free agent at guard. So the Broncos took him. So the Ravens, do you think their offensive line, what's your confidence level going into this season that they're going to be able to kind of hold up their end of the bargain?
I think it starts from the center, of course. We had Pro Bowler Tyler Linderbaum being our focal point in that middle of that offensive line. So I think having him is a huge plus. We did have a lot of injuries last year. on the O-line. We had Kevin Zeitler as well, who played really well. Ronnie Stanley, who was solid, but again, he didn't perform, as he said, up to his own standards. I mean, over the years, we've tended to cycle through a lot of offensive linemen. We don't tend to keep a lot of them. We see value in a few players, but we don't. It seems that we don't continue with some players if they have an off year, for example, like a Morgan Moses type player. It's, that older player who is perhaps at the end of their career, and we bring them in for 1 year to just help out, but we don't tend to build around them. So I think that our second round offensive line pick is definitely someone who could slot right in. I don't think that there's such a thing as like an undersized offensive lineman these days. In college, they're so big that they can just slot in physically. Mentally, they might be a little bit underutilized. Like they're not quite there yet with the schemes of the NFL compared to the college level. But physically, I don't worry too much about college players coming into the NFL. It's on that offensive line. So someone on the defensive line, there's a bit of a worry about the physicality, but on the offensive line, I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, and I was actually going to move into that. The last thing I'll say, though, is that I love the Ravens for drafting 2 offensive linemen. So Roger Rosengarten and Nick Samak, they draft both of them, and there's no guarantee who is going to be on the interior side along Tyler Lindenburn. Did I say his name right?
Linderbaum, yeah.
Linderbaum. So a lot of times you'll see, okay, a team has a need and then they draft this player and then it's like, okay, we can fill in this person's name at this position. I like that the Ravens went and drafted another interior offensive lineman to create a competition, and see, okay, because you got both players. One of them's going to feel like an underdog who was drafted later. And then you have, a higher ranked draft that's like, it's embarrassing if you lose your job. So it creates this really intense competition. And I just love when a team does that instead of just drafting it and then going to another position, get going. Because at worst case scenario, you're going to have depth. And it just, to me, it makes a lot of sense.
Depth is very important for sure. Like you can never have enough either running backs or players on the offensive side. Depth in all positions in the NFL is just because it's such a war of attrition, especially now they're adding more games in the NFL. It's going to be more of a need in terms of, depth is very important. I think it's not so much as I like to say, it's not so much who's the best at the end of the year, it's who's the healthiest at the end of the year. So we just need to stay healthy, and that'll be our key.
Now, going to the other side of the ball for the Ravens, you mentioned, pass rushers. Baltimore, it seems like what they're going to want to do is supplement some of these older players, because last year they had Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy, who both were under double-digit sacks by half a sack. I will say he had 9.5 and Kyle Van Noy had 9. So Baltimore trying to get more youthful on the roster, and looking at their draft, because I know they did draft a pass rusher. I believe so. I had it up here. I'll pull it back up. But do you think the Ravens, that their pass rush was something that was like a glaring weakness last year? Because it didn't seem that bad from an outsider perspective. Like I never thought, man, here it is. So they drafted, so Isaac out of Penn State, Adisa Isaac. So trying to get a little bit younger, and that was the only edge rusher they signed. They did double down on corner, and like I said, TJ Tampa in the 4th round, he was projected as like the 7th, 6th best corner, and he fell like 2 rounds too far. I mean, he was projected to go in the 2nd round. So getting Nate Wiggins, who I have a buddy who's really into college football. He's an ACC specialist where Clemson plays, and he couldn't say enough things about Nate Wiggins, and he's a Florida State fan. So, that's not, that's big of him. So But I love the TJ Tampa. I don't know if they're going to put him on nickel in the nickel position, put Nate Wiggins on the outside, but this defense, I think is
Yeah.
immediately going to be much better with Nate Wiggins and TJ Tampa.
Yeah.
And we'll see about the defensive end, but then
Mhm.
they also got wide receiver in the 4th round I was saying Devontae Walker and everything that he had to go through. And then they went running back with Rasheen Ali, running back out of Marshall, and then went a backup quarterback, of course, a backup quarterback. And then in the 7th round, they had 2 picks, and they got a center who they just signed that I was mentioning before. And they also got a safety out of Purdue. Going through these names, anybody jump off the screen and just tell you, hey man, watch out for this guy. I just have a feeling about
Yeah.
any of these players.
I think that the late rounds of the draft is something where I can't say that I pay a huge amount of attention to.
Right.
In Australia, like it is on at a time when most of us are working, so we can't be glued to it all the time. But as I said before, I think the defensive players that we do pick up, like I had heard of TJ Tampa and obviously Nate Wiggins going from Clemson, which is still a huge school, even though they've dropped off in the last few years. Those names definitely stood out to me, but I can't say that I would be able to give an in-depth description of their play style or what they'll bring to this team. But I think that the trust in our development is still there, and I have full faith that they'll be able to turn them into what we need them to be in our system. I think that our defense, to elaborate on that, was almost historic last year for a period of time. We might have had not as huge amount of sacks, but our points allowed was outstanding per game. We've re-signed a few players. Kyle Van Noy, obviously, Justin Madubuike was our interior defensive lineman, and he has been signed for another few years. Everyone knows Kyle Hamilton, Marlon Humphrey at this point. So
Yep.
any more depth to those guys? Yeah, Owe Adafe is just a beast. Losing Jadeveon Clowney kind of hurt a little bit. I would have liked to have seen him stay, especially on a possibly team-friendly contract. But he wanted a little bit more money somewhere else. So I think that we're in a good spot still with the defense, and going through the draft, drafting defensive players is still a great strategy. Even if you say you have a good defense, always good to get more defensive players in the draft.
Yeah, and they also brought in like 15 undrafted free agents. But when I look at the Ravens, I was like, I don't know how they're gonna be a better team. Like, where do you go from here? And then you go, okay, two star corners you add to this team last year, and people think about the Ravens running game, and they're like, well, the Ravens are a great rushing team, and they're right. Baltimore led the league in rushing last year, but Lamar Jackson still led the team in rushing yards, which is what people leave out. Lamar had 821 yards, and then there was Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and then Dalvin Cook there for a little bit. But
Keaton
now
Mitchell.
Keaton Mitchell. Got to give him his flowers. He did very well. He came in as a role player, and he did really well. But now you go down the list, and you're like, okay, offensive line, it's at least been resolved in the way where they got the competition going. Then you look at wide receiver. That is the only area that I still look at. Like, is that really solved? Is that going to work out? But then they drafted a wide receiver, so I'm going to give it the same pass I gave the lineman. It's at least on paper resolved. It remains to be seen. We'll wait for football. But then running back, you can put a big check mark right there. Derrick Henry, and then cornerback, ginormous check mark as well. So I look at this team like, man, they're ready to win a Super Bowl this year.
Yeah.
They should be the Super Bowl favorite. Arguably, they should. That is the expectation, right? To win the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great time to be
the expectation every year.
Every year, yeah. Realistically,
it's a little more. Yeah.
realistically, it is, and it's a great time to be a Baltimore sports fan. So, in for both the baseball and football teams. So I think championship or bust is definitely the expectation, especially with what happened last year and how close we got. But previous year's success is no guarantee of the next year's success. So you've got to take every year as if it was fresh and think that everyone's starting on the same level playing field. So you can't take anything for granted, and you've definitely got to fight as hard and don't take anything that you're just gonna waltz into the AFC Championship, something like that. You've got to really, especially in the division we're in, you've got to fight every game and take every game on its merits.
Yeah, any given Sunday, anybody
Yeah.
can beat anybody. So kind of moving away from the depth chart and personnel, what do you have a favorite Ravens moment that just stands out, like a moment in time that you just like? For me, I can think of like 3, but if you have 3, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious to what those were.
I think I'd go perhaps negative first is the Billy Cundiff miss, which kind of, I guess, is a blessing in disguise because we ended up getting the greatest kicker of all time. So it kind of worked out, I guess. That's a big moment, especially in my fandom of the team. Another moment would be the Will Hill kick 6 return against Cleveland in 2015. That was such a huge moment. That was in a time when we were post Joe Flacco and we were kind of in a no man's land, like I said before. Another big moment, I think, is even just last year, the Tylan Wallace punt return in overtime against the Rams was such a massive moment.
Oh my gosh! Wow, yeah, what a game!
That was huge, and even moments such as obviously the Super Bowl win. That's more of a memorable game, but like Jacoby Jones scoring in that Super Bowl from the kickoff is iconic. Those kind of moments where the team kind of resolves gets its identity from special, like 3 of those things I just said, special teams. Sorry, all 4 of them special teams. 1 negative, 3 positive, and that's kind of, we do things in an odd sort of way and in a kind of non-conventional way, and I think it mirrors the John Harbaugh era, being a special teams guy, and I think it's just the way we do things. But I'm trying to think. There's so many like moments, special games. Like, I mean, Alex Collins is one of my favorite players. I mean, rest in peace to him as well. Like,
he was the Irish jig.
His games that he had, some of those were some of my favorite memories. Lamar's massive, I think it was it last year? He had like a huge game against the Dolphins, which we lost, but I kind of felt like that was a moment where Lamar kind of announced himself in like, I'm for real, like I'm here. I've been injured last year, but I'm here. Trying to think of a couple more. Those are the ones that come straight off the head. I'm sure there's so many more.
Right.
But there's more even pre myself. I'm just thinking of the ones that I can remember watching. There's obviously huge ones in the 2000s, early 2000s with Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, etc., winning that Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer, which are all before I was a fan. So there's almost countless moments to think of.
Do you think the Ravens would have won the Super Bowl if the lights didn't go off at halftime?
Yes. I think that the lights off helped. That helped San Francisco more than it helped us. I think that in some way it kind of reset the game a little bit and allowed them to kind of collect themselves and be like, come on, it's almost like an extra timeout or an extra quarter time, just to give them a little bit of breathing space. So I think that luckily we still won it, but that would have been a huge story if that had, I mean, even bigger than it was if the Niners had come back and won that game.
Do you think Ray Lewis did it?
Did you get on the line with one of my Aussie friends. They always, we have obviously fantasy football group chats, and anytime anything happens with Ray Lewis or the Ravens, they call him the M word. So
Oh no, no, no!
that,
I wasn't
that's
gonna go that far.
so that's what that but like that's the Aussie kind of sense of humor, in terms of we rip each other that hard that
Yeah,
we know it's all
yeah.
friendly, but we are definitely pretty ruthless in our, especially when it comes to sporting teams. I wasn't around at that point. I can't say that I even like I didn't know what was going on then. I was only like 4 or 5 years old, so I didn't have any knowledge of what was going on. And in reading, I don't think he did it. I think he was in a situation where he probably shouldn't have been. And but I don't think there's any culpability in terms of misconduct or anything that deserved jail time or anything like that. I think if it was in today's light, we'd probably have more footage, we'd have more evidence, we'd have more knowledge about the situation. But I think it's one of those things that I don't think it's scarred him in terms of his reputation. I think he's done more in his life positive than negative. Incredible role model for the city and for other young players. So I think that question, I can't answer it fully, but I think I respect Ray Lewis far more than an incident in his youth.
I can appreciate that. I mean, it's a really fair answer, and that's cool that that's cool that you guys like rip on each other. It's really when I just have to be extra careful because everything goes up on YouTube, and I
Mhm.
just um definitely the group chats that I'm in are much more toxic than the podcast that we're running here. I'll just put it that way. All
Yeah.
right, rank these players
Mhm.
that you enjoyed watching in order. I'll say 1 through 3. I'll give you different
Yeah.
names, but I'll start with a really difficult one.
Mhm.
Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Terrell Suggs.
I'm going to say Ray Lewis 1, Terrell Suggs 2, Ed Reed 3. Simply because of
Ed Reed 3?
Ed Reed 3. I didn't connect with him as much as I did with Terrell Suggs. I know you wanted to talk about Terrell Suggs and his impact. I think it's just a personality thing in terms of I just really love the way that he went about intimidating the opposition, being a great foil for Ray Lewis in the later parts of Ray's career. I think that Terrell Suggs should be in I'm not sure if he is, but if he isn't, he should be in the Ravens Hall of Fame, in their Ring of Honor. His 10 years there were some of the best by any defensive player not named Ray Lewis, or Ed Reed. So I would say that I would just personality is why I would put, not so much for playing style. I think they're pretty comparable. Defensive ability. Obviously, they play different positions, but I think that Terrell Suggs for personality ranks higher for me than Ed Reed.
Yeah, and Terrell Suggs, like you said, he just had that larger than life personality and
Yeah.
was known for making key plays in the moment's biggest games. So I was going to ask, I have a couple more players, but just since we're talking about Terrell Suggs, do you feel
Mm-hmm.
like playing alongside Ray Lewis, he was a Raven for 16 years, do you
Yeah.
feel like he was in Ray Lewis's shadow to a certain extent where we would not be able to appreciate his greatness because
Mhm.
the guy that maybe one of 3 players or one of 5 that are better happened to be right next to this guy the whole time?
Yeah. I think nationally, you could see it that way. In terms of inside of the team, I think Ray Lewis was obviously the number one, but Suggs right there, perfectly complementing. I think that he definitely got the benefits that playing with a great player does in terms of like double teams or extra offensive attention, in terms of shying away from going towards Ray Lewis on the field. So then they ended up getting into the arms of Terrell Suggs. So I think he yes, he was in the shadow, but also he benefited in a way. I don't think it affected him negatively playing alongside such a great player.
I always felt like growing up, I don't know if do you play video games at all?
Not hugely. I have played Madden, yes, but not.
So before it was Madden, ESPN
Hmm.
released a version and it was called 2K5. And it
Yeah.
wasn't before Madden. It was just like happening at the same time, and then Madden bought it out
Hmm.
so that, they wouldn't have competition. But in that game, I remember I would play with the Ravens. I was like 10 years old playing this game. And I remember my favorite running back was Jamal Lewis. He was
Yeah.
just an awesome running back. I wasn't keeping up with his off the field stuff, but he was one of the, he was the Ravens ground and pound dude in
Yeah.
the 2000s, in the early 2000s. He had a really powerful physique. Oh wait, no, I just wanted to say all that about Jamal Lewis because I like him.
Yeah.
Jamal Lewis is going to be one of my next three.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm going to throw in, uh, Mark Andrews, and I'm going to throw in Anquan Bolin.
Oh, I mean, two of those players won Super Bowls. Hopefully, one of them will win one this year. Pedigree, I think you'd have to put Anquan Bolden and Jamal Lewis ahead of Mark Andrews. I do love Mark Andrews a lot. I think he's an incredible player. So yeah, I'd have to go Bolden 1, Jamal Lewis, and then Mark Andrews. Yeah.
Okay. Steve Smith. I almost said Stephen A. Smith. Steve Smith, who a lot of people might not remember him as a Raven, as a Panther, but anybody that's put the Raven helmet on is up for grabs here. So I'm going to go Shannon Sharp, Steve Smith, and Chris McAllister.
I'm gonna go Sharp 1, Steve Smith Senior, I believe he is, and McAllister 3. So
got him right here.
Shannon Sharp is pretty awesome. I like his stuff, his delivery, what he does is even off the field. On the field, he was such a character. Just
Skip.
Yeah.
Skip.
Yeah, I love that. I've probably watched that Hard Knocks from 2001 about 5 times. And I want my retribution. That one is so funny. I think, that's awesome.
That was one of the legendary Hard Knocks. That was one of the legendary ones. The Jets. No. Yeah, the Jets with Rex Ryan. That was a really good one too. And I thought the Lions 3 years ago was really good as well.
I think it was, wasn't it? I think it was 2 years ago. They were before the Jets, right? The Jets was last year. The Lions was before that.
And then the Cowboys was before that.
Cowboys, yep. And I think that there's some incredible. One of the funniest ones, I think, while we're on that topic, is the Cleveland Browns one with the offensive line coach who's doing the hut and his gut would move up and down. I found that very funny.
I got to refresh my memory on that one.
You remember some Hard Knocks are funny to go back and watch because of what happened in the season of that Hard Knocks. Is like you look at what happened to the Jets last year, and the entire show was about Aaron Rodgers, and then look what happens in the first game. 4 minutes in, it was just like,
oh my gosh,
yeah.
Were you mad at? Were you sad about that?
I was watching.
Like, I was hurt
as a football fan. Yeah, for sure. I felt like we were robbed of a storyline that would have been so cool. And my brother's a Packers fan, so he was kind of a bit sadder than I was. He saw the writing on the wall.
Cheese, can you?
The what? Sorry,
the cheesehead.
Cheesehead. Yeah, right.
Yeah, cheesehead.
Nice.
I was born in Wisconsin.
Team. Okay. Yeah.
I was born in Wisconsin, so I always cheer for the Packers. Not as much as a Broncos fan, but I cheer for them.
The Aaron Rodgers situation. I think it was such a huge storyline in the preseason, Hard Knocks. So I think that the way that it ended up is pretty tragic. But yeah, you can look at some of those Hard Knocks shows and just be like, wow, the stuff that happened after that is, it almost deserves its own show. With the Jets would have been hilarious.
Yeah, just watching. It would have been cool to see how Rogers rehabs too.
Yeah,
Going
yeah.
through.
Zach Wilson
Okay.
being himself in that team would have just. I would have loved to have been one of those offensive or defensive players, being like, "We've got a Zach Wilson again, really?"
How did we find ourselves back in this situation after everything we've done? Joe Flacco or Lamar Jackson?
I think if you'd asked me that the start of last season, I would have said Joe Flacco, but I think right now it has to be Lamar Jackson. I think I think I was incredibly happy for Joe Flacco, even though he was playing on the Browns. But like, his years that he went, how many years did he spend in the Broncos? Like 2 years, I think, as a backup. One as
just 1 year.
1 year, and then he went to the Jets. Then he went to the Browns, obviously, and won Comeback Player of the Year. I think, but his time as a Raven is not as good as it was personally. Team-wise, obviously, won a Super Bowl and had a great playoff run, but overall, his stats and the way that he was a part of that team is not as impactful as Lamar has been on this team in the last 5 years.
I think that's fair, and I think when it's all said and done, Lamar will probably be ranked a little bit higher. So the NFL hasn't released a schedule yet, but it has released your future opponents. So of course you play Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and the Bengals twice a year. Now moving outside of those divisional games, I'm going to give you some opponents, and you tell me on a scale of, I guess, 1 to 10 how excited you are for that game.
Yeah.
Washington Commanders.
I mean, it's a battle of the, Maryland. I'll probably say that a bit weird. Americans would be like, why does he say it like that?
No, it didn't actually. It sounded
Maryland?
Yeah, Maryland.
Okay.
No,
yeah, I guess
as long as you don't say
so
Maryland, you're good.
I watch so much American content that I say it Maryland instead of most Australians would say it Maryland.
No, that I now you got me questioning how I say it. To be honest, I say Maryland.
Yeah, I think I'd say it the same simply because I watch so much NFL. I think that it's they're a unique situation, obviously in a different period of time, having just drafted number 2 overall. So I wouldn't say I'm worried about that game, and I probably wouldn't be that excited about it in terms of a rivalry.
Right. It is, like you said, the Battle of Maryland, though, because when I was visiting, like I said, my ex-wife's family was all diehard Ravens fans. And when we would go to like DC, you could tell when you've kind of crossed the line and now it's all Commanders fans. And they really fight for that territory. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I said this game and I was like, this is going to be a 1 out of 10. And then you said that and I was like, oh shit, he's right. I've been there. That is a real thing, All right. The Philadelphia Eagles.
It's tough with NFC teams where you don't see them that often. So the rivalry doesn't tend to be there, but like they're going to be a good team next year. It'll be a good test for sure. Whenever we play them, hopefully play them at the start of the year to kind of see where we're at in terms of how good we are.
Little measuring stick game early in the season. Well, by the looks of your schedule, you're going to have a lot of those. Outside of the Steelers and the Browns and the Bengals, which is those, every game is going to be tough there. You could make an argument that this is one of the most difficult schedules in this year. And I have something written down in one of my journals about their strength of opponents and all that. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm looking at the teams, and as we keep going, it's like it gets harder and harder. This might be one of the hardest teams that you play this year, but the Denver Broncos.
I think. Oh man, Bo Nix has got me scared. That 6
Oh,
years, those 6 years he was in college really got me quaking about. But I think
last time
yeah,
6 quarterbacks were taken in the first round, the
yeah,
6th quarterback taken was Dan Marino.
that's
So
true.
we might have Dan
1983.
Marino.
Yeah, the 83 draft was a legendary one. So yeah, I think yeah, that's what I said about this draft is that you absolutely have no idea how this is going to pan out. Even look at when was it? The Josh Rosen draft is what I remember him from 2018. I think it was. It was the Lamar Jackson
Yeah.
draft.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's 5, I think, in the first round, and you know, 2 of them have made have made Pro Bowl teams. So I think that playing Denver is probably something you look at in terms of it depends if we play them home and away, like
You are playing them at home.
home. So yeah, it's probably going to be a little bit of an easier game than if we were playing them away.
Ouch. Ouch. We'll see about that. Now
Okay.
we're gonna have to have you come back on the week
Yeah,
before that game, and
sure.
we'll have to talk smack. Hopefully I'll have something to be hopeful about at that point, whenever that
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
The Buffalo Bills. Now,
yeah,
Buffalo and the Eagles, I've named both those. So you really only have 8 home games and you have 9 away games. So
yeah,
we've already established Pittsburgh, the Browns, the Bengals, the Eagles,
yeah.
Buffalo are all tough games. You got maybe 3 easy home games, but I would say this is probably one of your tougher games at home, at least. But what do you think about the Bills?
I think they're in a world of hurt. The Bills. I feel as though as much expectations as the Ravens have had on themselves, the Bills have had, you know, as much, if not more, on their team, and they lost basically their entire defensive starting team. You know, they lost Stephon Diggs. They've signed Chase Claypool the other day. For goodness sakes, like that's kind of tells you where they're at.
Yeah.
But then again, they still have one of the best quarterbacks in the game, and that can solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's so funny. They signed Chase Claypool, so you know it's bad.
Yeah,
All right, going to the and the Raiders. I must have left
yeah.
them out because
Raiders at
I'm a
home.
Broncos fan. I don't
Yeah,
like the Raiders, so I just ignore them
yeah,
completely. I'm just joking, but the away opponents, you have one more away game than you have home
yeah,
games this year. Of course, you got the AFC North, and then
yeah.
we go to this next game. This is going to be a tough one. You could make an argument this will be the toughest game of the year. And I'll just say, I go down all these teams and I'm like, yeah, that's a really good team, but are they better than the Ravens? I just don't
Mhm.
know if there's that many of those this year, but
Yeah.
Kansas City Chiefs.
I mean, we haven't had any big games against them recently, have we? Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Trying to
I
think of
can't
one.
think of one.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, we've played them well in the regular season the last few years, so I think that
Season
just
opening game here, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah. So I think that I mean, that's going to be an incredible matchup. So much hype around that one. That will be, yes, that will be a huge game.
Yeah.
Possibly the biggest game of the year, depending on where we are in the standings later on in the year. Yeah,
Well, the NFL will normally do whoever won the Super Bowl will play the Thursday night to open the season.
yeah,
Um, but I think that I'm not sure. I'll have to look into it. I know the NFL is playing in Brazil opening
mhm,
week, but I don't know if that means the first game of the season or if they're going to stay to the Thursday schedule. If they do a home game Thursday night football like they do every year, I think it would be the Chiefs and the Ravens as a rematch. But moving on, the Los Angeles Chargers, who kind of revamped their whole team with your brother. I'm super pumped about this game because we get the Harbaugh
yeah,
brother
yeah,
duel right off the bat. I
yeah.
think this is the game I'm maybe most excited about, aside from the Broncos game.
Mhm.
What do you think about the Los Angeles Chargers?
The Harbaugh Bowl. I'd say it'll be a good game, especially away from home. Um, but again, I don't rate their team as highly as I would have last year. I think they again are looking to rebuild a little bit. But then again, same with the Buffalo Bills. They've got a great quarterback, so that can fix a lot of problems. But yeah, I wouldn't see that as a huge game. Maybe a 4 out of 10.
4 out of 10. Okay. I'm a little bit higher on it, but that's the beauty of it. We all kind of have games that mean a little bit. Like, I don't know. I have an older brother. I'm really close to him, so I'm a sucker for these brother matchups, whether it was Travis Kelce and Jason Kelce or
Yeah.
any brother. But this game, I'm gonna say, actually, let me save this one. The New York Giants.
The Giants, that's probably a 2 out of 10. We should probably win that. Maybe we might rest a few starters. Who knows?
Okay, the Dallas Cowboys, who Jerry Jones said, I'm pushing all the chips to the table. We're all in. And then they moved back in the draft and made no offseason moves. I find it hysterical. It just is so funny to me. But what do you think about the matchup? It's going to be on the road in Dallas, actually in Arlington. They don't play in Dallas, but they're going to be playing the Dallas Cowboys. Are you feeling excited about that one?
That would be, I reckon, like probably a 6 out of 10. It'd be exciting. I think it's good for, to face teams that we don't face very often, see things that the players don't often see, and then you think of down the long term, if the Cowboys realize their potential, you could be a Super Bowl preview in terms of, if you see them later, that game could be good intel and research. But I don't see it as a huge rivalry game. I'd say a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, and we're gonna finish with two teams that I look at as up and coming teams, and this team is the team that I predicted to win the Super Bowl next year. People think I'm crazy, and the Ravens are the team that I think they'll face in the AFC Championship game, the Houston Texans.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that. That's that'll be a great game. I think that'll be like a 7.5 out of 10. Like, it's getting up there. Like, that's
a 10 out of 10 for you. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I think the NFL is so cyclical in terms of it goes in just in a roundabout. We get hyped about a player. CJ Stroud is the hot topic of the moment. He might have a couple of games and they'll be like, oh, what's next? What's new? Especially with how many quarterbacks just came into the league. And I think that the Texans are the hot team right now. But year to year, there's always new teams that come in. So I say that it's going to be a big game right now. Texans might be, they might have a losing record at this point and it won't be as hyped. But I think that CJ Stroud will likely be pretty good and the Texans will be pretty good. So it's going to stay, probably maybe 8 out of 10.
Yeah, and I know sometimes people are just like, oh, this is the hype train and I'm jumping on it. But I gotta say, CJ Stroud, I've been watching this sport my whole life, and there's only a couple quarterbacks that have ever kind of appeared as, and even when you talk about Mahomes, he didn't even play as a rookie. I can't think of anything that comes to mind. Andrew Luck would be the last one, maybe, that just came in and you're like, oh, okay. This guy's going to be good. I mean, he was up for MVP as a rookie. We're not even talking about rookie of the year. We're talking about MVP. He broke all the records of, passing yards as a rookie, and nothing against, Lamar Jackson. But when you look at his passing yards in a season, I wrote down here, the most he's ever had is 3,700. It does seem like, but CJ Stroud doesn't run, so they're just kind of different type of quarterbacks. CJ Stroud's really always looking to throw the football, whereas Lamar wants to tuck it and run it a little bit more. But do you think, like the CJ Stroud thing, like that's just hype and it's going to come down, or do you feel the way I do? Like, we just got a sneak peek of what the next decade is going to look like in the NFL.
If I'd seen him play 5 years ago, I would have been like, oh, this is going to be it next decade. But I've seen so many things, not just in NFL, happen with players that I really can't say with any certainty that this is going to be the franchise QB or the face of the league for the next 10 years. I certainly hope he's among that conversation. I don't hope any ill will in terms of injuries or off-field stuff. But I think that we're definitely looking at the future in terms of quarterbacks in the league for the next, hopefully the next few years for sure. And I think the Texans will reflect that in terms of their record next year.
Yeah, in most passing yards single season in history,
Yeah.
you got Peyton Manning at number 1 with the
Yeah.
Denver Broncos, 5,477. In 2011, you had Drew Brees with the Saints, who had 5,476. So Manning threw 1
Yeah.
yard more.
Yeah.
In the 2021 Tom Brady Buccaneers, 5,316, and then Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs. Do you think Lamar's going to maybe dial the running back and have one of these type of years, or is it going to be 3,700 every single season, maybe 3,500? Because that seems like a lot more yards to go to get to that 5,000, almost
Mm.
5,500.
Yeah.
Do you see Lamar Jackson as somebody that could reach that level, or hey, that's not his cup of tea? While you're
Yeah.
busy focusing on if he's gonna do that, he became
Mm.
the first quarterback with 6,000 passing yards and 3,000 rushing yards. I mean,
Yeah.
like, what do you think? Is that a fair question?
I think he definitely has the ability to do that. I think it just depends on the game style and I think that he prefers the winning over the personal stats, and he said that as well. Like, I would trade all my MVPs for a Super Bowl win. The way, especially this year late in game, where it would be a passing situation and he would run and maybe not even get the first down, but they would punt simply because of the time it left in the game to try and chew up some clock to get the win, was something that shows a level of maturity. And I don't think that he will. I don't think he'll reach a 5,000-yard season passing simply because of his skill set. He's obviously going to get slower as you get older, but I don't see him getting into that 5,000, just a pure pocket passer type player.
Yeah, and Lamar is he has 3 career playoff games with over 100 rushing yards. That's most by any quarterback in NFL history. So while he may not, get to that 5,000 mark,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that he's not out here breaking records. And then you have some people that are like, well, that's great that he ran for over 100 yards 3 times, but that's not what a quarterback's job is. A quarterback's job. And I always say, like, like, honestly, if you win the football game, it doesn't really matter how you did it, whether you ran for 200 yards and threw for 100. What do you say to critics that say Lamar Jackson, runs too much and he needs to develop more as a pure pocket quarterback? What do you say to that?
I think that there's always going to be critics. There's always going to be people who don't like what they do, what certain quarterbacks do, and I think that there'd be quarterbacks coming in now into this new feel of quarterback play in the league that would say that if you're just a pocket passer, you're not helping your team win. So now everyone's got to have that running game and I think that players like Lamar Jackson and Russell Wilson and players like that in this newer era, post Brady, post Manning, have really helped to show the way for teams that say that we only need a pocket passer. No, you need someone who can run as well. Like you said, Stroud doesn't run before. He can. He's looking to pass first, but in the moment where he needs to escape and run, he can do that, especially in his younger years. So I don't think he needs to change his style, is what I'm saying.
If you look at like I don't know if you've seen like betting lines and stuff, but I know FanDuel has lines, and let's say the over under for Lamar Jackson, his rushing yards would be set at like 60.
Yeah.
So you got to say he's going to go over or under 60. But CJ Stroud's all year was like 6 yards, 7 yards.
Wow.
And it made me have to go into the football database and I go, wow, this guy really doesn't run the football. But yes, he can. That's the thing. Like, he has the ability to do it if he needs to. Now, there were 3 games last year, one versus Detroit that stands out. I saw that Detroit Ravens game and I thought Lamar Jackson is the best quarterback. I mean, when he's playing like that, when he's dialed in, this guy that's why anybody that says, oh, he's not a real quarterback, you must not be watching football. Like you have to
Yeah.
just, you got to be
Yeah.
missing these moments. Because during the Detroit game, I wrote it down here. He went 21 for 27.
Yeah.
Okay, so only threw 6 incompletions,
Yeah.
almost an 80% completion percentage. He threw for 357 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions with 155.8 QBR.
Yeah.
And of course, you destroyed the Lions in that game 38-6.
Yeah.
And then there was games later in the year, both in December, one against the Rams and one against Miami,
Mhm.
where he threw for 316 yards and 321 yards. The last one against Miami, 321 yards. He had 5 touchdowns and no picks,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
158.3 QBR. So it does seem like, as at least as an outsider, like I said, I look at Lamar and I see these moments, these games, and I'm like,
Yeah.
if they could get that kind of performance out of him in the playoffs,
Mm.
they'll easily win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But it just seems like something is kind of, and you said that you think it's just they don't do what got him to these big games. They changed
Yeah.
their philosophy. I think they ran it like 2 times in the second half of the Chiefs game,
Yeah.
something like that. I mean, it was just absolutely ridiculous. But I think, for what it's worth, I think Lamar Jackson has everything he needs to win a Super Bowl. And when you're playing as good as he's playing in the regular season, moving on from him is not an option. Like, the
Yeah.
grass isn't greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. And they need
Yeah.
to continue to give him weapons. And then last year with Odell and Zay Flowers, I said, man, like Lamar has no more excuses. But I think
Mhm.
in the middle of the season, we were like, Odell's not really bringing that much to the table.
Mm.
They're dealing with injuries. Zay Flowers has to step up. Do you think that they have surrounded Lamar Jackson with enough tools to succeed, or do you feel like the Ravens organization's holding him back um, by maybe the way they're drafting, or the fact that Rashad Bateman maybe isn't that great? Maybe they
Yeah.
need a Calvin Johnson, like you said earlier.
I don't think they're holding him back. I think, yeah, it's everyone's pulling on the same line in terms of trying to get in the same direction, playing the same game style. I don't think that it's tough to say whether they've given him enough, because I've seen quarterbacks do things with players that aren't household names
Right. Tom
before, and
Brady.
it's been around the quarterback play, and I think that the buck stops with the quarterback, and I think that you can have the weapons that we've given him are enough to win a Super Bowl. It's just whether or not we have the ability to get there is the biggest question. So I don't think they're shortchanging him in any way. No.
All right. Well, I was gonna close with this, and by the way, I really enjoyed this, so thank you again for coming on here. The recent draft that just happened, the Baltimore Ravens website, BaltimoreRavens.com,
Mhm.
put out a story on May 3rd, and this is why I love local writers. 9 cool facts about the Ravens' 9 draft picks. Okay.
Yeah.
So they go through Nate Wiggins, and this is what some people may not know. Wiggins wanted to try his hand at wide receiver due to his speed. His mother, however, convinced him to stick with defense, citing Wiggins' size and speed has differentiating factors among other cornerbacks his age. So Nate Wiggins was almost a wide receiver.
Mm. There you go.
Love that.
Nice.
Your offensive tackle, Roger Rosengarten, although rookie minicamp will be his first time taking an NFL practice field, Rosengarten has got his fair share of practice among NFL greats. The offensive tackle played under 3-time Super Bowl champion Ed McCaffrey for his final 2 seasons at Baylor Christian High School. And that's McCaffrey's son, Luke and Dylan. They played alongside Rosengarten in a Shanahan-style offensive system. Isn't that kind of cool that he grew up with the
Yeah.
McCaffreys
Yeah,
and was
that's
coached by
full
his dad?
circle. Yeah, it's
Full,
pretty
right?
cool. Yeah.
Then Adissa Isaac, he predicted he would make it to the NFL in 5th grade, is what his fun fact.
Wow.
He said in the 5th grade, the question was, what is your dream? And he wrote that his dream was to go to the NFL.
Hmm.
Who knew that he would have gone this far? Wide receiver Devontae Walker.
Yeah.
We talked about his journey. His biggest fan has always been his grandmother. When Walker was in high school, Black required multiple surgeries on her hip and knee. Walker became her primary caregiver, also balancing school and football. And when Walker suffered a knee injury before his first college season, he opted to stay home instead and take care of Black while working at Bojangles to pay for his own
Wow.
rehab. I mean,
Bojangles is what is Bojangles?
It's funny you say that because I've never eaten Bojangles a day in my life, and I just got it yesterday.
Okay.
It's fast food. Yeah. I've never, ever gotten it. It's so funny that I just got it in this story. But I mean, this guy's a warrior. You know, you take care of your grandmother, you get injured, you're working at Bojangles to pay for your own rehab. I just thought that it'd be fun to, share a couple of these little things with you because I think it's really fun getting to know your new players. And TJ Tampa, aside from being one of the biggest steals of the draft, he's being talked about for his interesting name. He was born Marquez Tampa after his father. The Iowa State draft pick has gone by TJ his entire life. Tampa explained the acronym stands for Tampa Junior. So he goes,
Tampa.
Tampa Junior Tampa, right? I didn't come up with the nickname. I just kind of grew up on it. Tampa said in his post-draft press conference. And did you know Bo Nix, while we're talking about names, do you know Bo Nix is the shortest name in the NFL ever?
Wow.
It's the shortest one. And then some people said Ty Law. But Ty Law, his real name is not Ty Law. Bo Nix's real name is Bo Nix. So cool little thing. And then last but not least, the quarterback you drafted to be the backup, Devin Leary. Despite receiving nods for his throwing power, Leary throws with his non-dominant right hand. So he writes with his left hand, but he learned how to throw with his right while using his brother's baseball glove as a child because so it was the other hand. So you have an ambidextrous quarterback. Like you don't see that often in the NFL. A guy that does everything with his right hand, but he throws a football with his left hand. That's gonna be fun, a little fun story. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on here, and I didn't know if you had any closing thoughts or anything.
Was there one more team on the away schedule that you said, or was that the last one?
Yeah. There was one more. And speaking of Tampa Junior Tampa, the last team was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah. Okay. The Baker Mayfield train rolls on in Tampa. I think that the way that he's gone about things is pretty cool, and I think that what they did last year is great, and I think that that'll just be a kind of a mutual respect, a bit of another measuring stick game. So I'd say maybe like a 5 out of 10. This is all obviously pending where we are in the season and how important these games are. So every game is important. Want to win every game, but I can't put that at a high priority at the moment.
Yeah, and as far as division predictions go, I think everyone's going to have the Ravens at 1, but Bengals, Browns, Steelers, and it's like you can't really just put the Bengals at 2. I mean, Joe Burrow. Would you rather, if you could push a button and Joe Burrow would be the Ravens quarterback, would you push that button right now?
No way. No,
I'm
chance. Sorry. I can't envision a world where Joe Burrow would be my quarterback. No, I can't do that. I think that the way that he's done things is great, but it's not the Baltimore way. Cincinnati has their own identity, and I think that he has done well, but I couldn't see that. And I think that the Bengals would probably I'd probably put them at second if he's healthy. And then I'd probably put the Steelers at third, and then Browns at 4, because we just don't know who's their quarterback. We kind of know, but we don't. They had such movement last year that it's tough to know who's going to be there. And they could all be over 500. That's the thing.
And your buddy that's a Packers fan,
Yeah.
The Ravens play the Packers not this year coming up, but 2025 season. They play the Packers. Do you guys ever get together and watch football games together?
Well, yeah. Well, it's my brother, younger brother.
Oh, it's
He's
your
a
brother.
Packers
I
fan.
missed that part.
So he is often watching his game, his game, and we sometimes get together and watch them. But I think if we tried to watch a Packers Ravens game together, it probably wouldn't end well. I'd say we're both very passionate about the team. But I definitely, when they were bad for that 5 minutes 2 years ago, which was, I gave them a lot of crap about that.
No, I know how it is when I was in the Navy. I would deploy to places like Italy, Iceland, Norway, and my deployment was during the NFL season, and there were days where we'd be flying a mission, at 3 in the morning, and I was like, oh my, we got to land by 4. I got to turn my stuff in because the game's starting at 4 a.m. Some days it's 2 a.m. and it's like it gets very difficult to keep track of the season. So I
Yeah,
admire anybody that lives overseas
yeah,
that's able to keep up with their team the way you have kept up with the Ravens. So,
yeah.
uh, would never have thought our first interview would be with somebody from Australia, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, I just want to say thanks for coming on, and you're always invited back on too. It would really be cool if we brought you back on maybe a couple days before Broncos Ravens kicks off.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to ever chat about any Ravens games or any AFC North stuff, I'm always free to chat about that. Obviously, different time zones. It's nearly 3 p.m. here. I'm sure you're about to go to bed. It's probably close to midnight where
Yep.
you are. So we're just probably going to start prepping dinner or something. So different times. I'm also 12 hours ahead of you, so I can tell you what the future looks like. So
Yes.
all the games that happen here they always happen 12 hours before. But yeah, it's definitely awesome being on the other side of the world, but also having a connection to a league that is so awesome. And yeah, I'm glad that it can bring people together, not just in Australia, but also internationally.
I really want to go to Sydney, Australia. That's one of the places that I've
Mhm.
always wanted to go.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, man, how's the weather right now? Is it
It's,
warm?
it's getting it's getting chilly. It's getting well. When I say chilly, it's just dipped below 20 degrees Celsius. So I think that's about 75
68
Fahrenheit.
degrees?
So that's like 75, 80 degrees Celsius, Fahrenheit.
Oh, okay, and that's hot for you.
It's getting no. I'm saying that's getting down. It's getting kind of low. Our average
Oh,
summer
it's
temp.
cold for you.
Yeah, as I'm wearing a jumper, so our average summer temps are roughly in the like 90-degree Fahrenheit range. So we're definitely getting to the cooler part of the year. So I start watching NFL when it's like freezing cold at night, like maybe like 10 degrees, and then by the Super Bowl, it's we're wearing we're wearing singlets because it's 30 degrees Celsius, 100
It's so
Fahrenheit.
funny how that works. We're in the same globe, but
Yeah,
we're experiencing our seasons on
yeah,
totally opposite times. It's so cool. Well, thank you again, man, for coming on here. Try to stay dry. I heard Sydney's expecting a month's worth of rain the
yeah,
first week of May. So,
yeah. Oh,
uh,
I'm not in Sydney. I'm in Brisbane, which is about 9 hours drive north. It's about
oh,
an
okay.
hour flight north of Sydney. So
How long does it
yeah,
take to get from, say, the southernmost point to the top northernmost point of
probably,
Australia?
it would probably take you about 20 hours to drive, maybe
Okay.
about a 6 hour flight.
So that would be probably the equivalent of going from Maine to Florida, something
Yeah,
like that.
it's
Yeah.
it's pretty similar actually. Yeah, going from north to south, it's pretty similar in Australia, and I think we're a bit smaller, like thinner. Like from LA to New York probably is longer than what Australia is side to side, but yeah, it's pretty close in terms of land mass.
Is there like an Australian slang word that like only an Australian would know that you could pass to me? Like if I'm watching a
Uh,
football game, maybe something good, something bad. It could be like, interception, s anything.
you want something PG or
Um, as
no,
long as
I'd
it's
say
not terrible.
I'd say Wuckers, like
Wakas.
like no wuckers. It's just we shorten everything. So if you're like, oh, that's not like no worries, we just say it no wuckers or something like that.
No
Uh,
Wakas.
Struth, something that people say a lot. Struth, like it's like, oh, come on, something like
Oh,
that.
okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But how do they say it? Is it like Struth?
No, it's not like that. It's more of like a, oh, Struth. Like, oh, I'm a
Oh,
bit dejected. Like, oh, Struth. Far
oh,
out.
Struth.
Yeah,
I
something
like
like that.
it. I
So
like it.
when Bo Nix throws 5 interceptions in his first game, you'll be Struth. This again?
Struth.
Yeah.
Struth. Yeah. No, I reject that idea. I resent that. Things are going to be great with Bo Nix, and can't wait to talk
Yeah.
again in the future. So thank you, man, for coming on here.
No
And
worries.
hope you have a great night, and hopefully the Ravens make it to the Super Bowl.
I hope so too. Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
guys. Thank you guys for listening. Please like this video, and we'll see you guys next time.